Hey guys, and welcome back. This is part 3 of this short series on my build of a walnut bedside table. So as you had seen in the last video, we had put together the main structure of the bedside table, and I told you that our focus for this video was going to be the build of the drawers as well as their installation. I have to be honest that the build of these drawers, although it's easy, it's something that I had to use a lot of my scrap wood for. I'm trying not to purchase any wood for any of this project. I need to use up some of what's laying around. And so these are just some 3/4 inch sheets of plywood that I've got from various other house projects. Initially, I'm measuring up to make sure that I've got all the material available to me. And then I'm going to rip everything down to the same size, at least for these two main drawers on the front side. So with so many of these pieces that are scrap wood, one of the edges is typically not straight in my case. That's usually because I've used a circle saw out on a job site or something working with it. So what I like to do is I'll burn, an eighth or a quarter of an inch on one side as I cut it the first pass, and that's to get a nice straight line. Then I'll come back and actually adjust the table saw to the proper width and cut the actual width of the board. Once I'm done with all of this, I take it over to my miter saw stand there, and I'll cut the flush ends on one side of them. And then, as you might expect, the back portion of the drawer will be a lot wider from the two sides. Now these are going to be pretty simple drawers. How they're going to be constructed is that each of the side and rear pieces are going to be cut with a small channel that's about a 1/4 inch from the bottom edge and measures about a 1/4 by 1/4 square. This is going to be essentially a rabbet type cut that I could do with a dado blade on my table saw, but I always have found it a little bit easier, at least less time consuming, to just use a single blade width and then offset my fence slightly to get the proper width that I want. So I'm cutting everything to the first cut because I know that's a fixed one. I'm only going to cut this first board to the offset so that I can check the fit of the board along my bottom plywood piece, my drawer bottom, before going in and cutting all of them to the same size. I don't want to make them oversized or undersized, so I'd rather check a fit on the first board, and then once I'm pretty confident in it, I can rip through the rest of them. For the assembly of the drawers, I'm just going to do a simple butt joint. I've got glue going onto the ends of my rear piece, and then my side walls will just be pin nailed in place on top of that. I think it's simple enough for an approach like this. There's no need to get fancy with miter cuts or dovetails, and that's because this is going to be a hidden joint. It's going to be back into the bowels of the bedside table, and you're never going to see it. I think it's plenty strong for the application too. And like I said, simple enough to move forward with. What I'm going to do with the drawer fronts, though, is that I'm going to use pocket holes in these side walls to secure the fronts. Then I'll put some screws in, hidden screws. And the idea there is that because you're always going to be pulling on the drawer face, you don't want it to come free of these side walls or the drawer slides. While I'm letting the drawer bodies dry, I've got the drawer faces loosely placed into the frame of the bedside table. I'm using shims all around the perimeter to keep an even gap with the framing, and then I'm using a pencil just to mark the inside of the frame where the position of the back face of the front plate is. I'm doing this so that I can position the drawer slides at the correct depth into or out of the frame, so that when everything closes, I should have a pretty consistently flush front face that aligns with the front face of those spars that I have installed. I've already done the top drawer, and I'm finding it useful to do this from all different sides. As you can see, I've got this leaned on the side so that it's easy to work on. Sometimes it's just best, especially with like automotive stuff, just to get things out of the way so that you have easy access to the work you're going to be doing. Now when I do drawer slides, and to be honest, I'm not sure if it's the correct way or not, but it works for me, is that I will install the stationary piece with the oblong holes that are oriented forward and backwards into my framing. That allows me to adjust the face depth into the installed structure at the closure. And then on the drawers themselves, on the removable portion of these drawer slides, I'll use the vertical oblong holes so that I can adjust kind of the pitch or the up and down position of the drawer in the cavity. Once I've got my measurement, then from the stationary portion, I can measure up onto my drawer frame about where I need to put these other slides. And like I said, I'll put the vertical slots on these ones. I always like to trace out the holes so that as I'm doing adjustment further down the road, I can see how far, or at least have some kind of reference point to measure how far up and down I need to shift things. I also find it helpful to draw a long straight line so that, again, as I'm doing adjustments, I can see that I've still got things positioned parallel to the bottom edge of my drawer. For these drawer portions, I just run these flat to the workbench so that I'm ensuring that I'm getting the right closure dimension that I had measured or transcribed onto the framing. And then we'll do a check fit. I know that I've edited out a lot of video that shows just how tedious this can be sometimes. There is a lot of adjustment required to make sure that I'm getting things correct. But at least for this first portion, before I get a faceplate on there, it's just to check that I'm not binding up on anything and that I've got a smooth operation. Now, just as we had done before, I'm going to use my shims again to get the proper position of this faceplate in the cavity of the bedside table frame. Once I've got these in place with everything consistently shimmed around in a proper gap around the perimeter, I'm going to do a small line with a pencil underneath and from behind so that I can mark that faceplate position with respect to the drawer body that I've now got. This will help me get everything aligned properly so that I can install the drawer face to the drawer body and hopefully not have to do too much extravagant, adjustment after the fact. There always will be some. I'm not saying you can avoid it, but at least it'll get me in the ballpark. And then, as I mentioned, I've got pocket hole screws on the sides of this drawer body that'll go into the front face and give me a really strong connection. Once I have everything kind of figured out, then I'll use some glue and make sure that it's got a screwed and glued approach here. as I alluded to, here comes the adjustment portion. The drawer slide isn't quite going in as I had hoped, and I've got a case where it's a little proud on the left and a little under proud on the right. So this is where I can adjust the lateral motion of those drawer slides, the stationary portion, forward and back to get that to sit a little bit better. And at the same time, keep an eye on what the gap looks like, and you can adjust the vertical position up and down on the left or right side to make sure everything comes together as you want. With things lined up well, then it should slide together pretty nicely. So a little trick here is that if the drawers seem to have a little inconsistency in the gap, either left or right side, I suppose you could do it on the top as well, though it might be a little bit more difficult, is that you could trace a line like I'm doing with a pencil, just using the legs of the bedside table to be your guide. And what I can do then is cut that little overlap portion or the inconsistency off of the drawer. That should clean things up pretty nicely then. But like anything, it means taking things apart once again and having to do a little bit more adjustment to get them all back together. I do think it's worth it though. With the drawer face adjusted to how I need it to fit the opening, I'm at the point of no return and glue is being put onto the drawer body. I'm also going to use glue and the pocket hole screws, as I had mentioned before, to secure the face of the drawer, and that should be a pretty strong connection to be constantly pulling on. And as always, once everything's put together, I just like to get it back in place to verify that it's how I wanted it to be, and I'm pretty pleased with how these two had turned out. Now with those front two drawers completed, I'm going to turn my attention to this side hidden drawer. So this is something that I had been wanting to put into a piece of furniture for a while. I thought it was kind of a neat technique, and this is the opportunity to try it out. So the drawer face for this one is cut as flush as possible to the legs of the bedside table to make it look as if it's an apparent piece of the bedside table frame. Instead of a handle though on the front of this drawer, it's going to be using push to open drawer slides, so that all you have to do is depress it slightly and then it should pop out to you. Like with the other drawers, I'm using this shimming technique to get everything positioned correctly, and then I'll mark the inside back of this drawer face so that I know how far into the frame I need to install those drawer slides. I found this drawer to be a little bit more awkward to work on just because of its position behind the side skirts of this bedside table, as well as kind of just the orientation of it being on the side versus the front. The cavity is a little bit harder to get access to, and so I had to adjust my work orientation a little bit. The drawer construction for the secret drawer is identical to the front two, just done on a smaller scale. I've got butt jointed 3/4 inch plywood making up the side walls of the drawer. I've got a rabbet cut in those bottoms so that I can put in the bottom wall, or this bottom piece of plywood, for the drawer. The front is made of the walnut just as everything else is, except like I mentioned, it's cut a little bit larger so that there's minimal gap around the sides. And then I'm going to install the drawer slides into it in the same way, where I'm using the vertical hole pattern for the drawer, the lateral hole pattern for the stationary portion, and then that should give me the flexibility I need to adjust things and get everything to operate correctly. I've got to admit that I'm pretty proud of how this hidden drawer turned out. It wasn't any harder to do than the front drawers, aside from being a little awkward to work on, but I think how it turned out is pretty neat. It's a feature that is very discreet looking, but functioned how I had hoped it would. In our next video, we'll be finishing up these drawers by adding some drawer pulls to them, at least for the two fronts, as well as cleaning things up prior to staining. I appreciate you guys tagging along in this third video. We'll catch you on the next one. As always, feel free to drop your comments, questions down below, and give us a thumbs up. We'll talk to you later.